everyone, my name is Tiffany Marsh. I am a second year AUD student, and I am also a member of National NISLA's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Action Work Group. This year, for Deaf Awareness Month, we decided to ask the deaf community, members of the deaf community, what their experiences were with SLPs and audiologists, and how we, as future clinicians, can better serve them once we graduate and go into the field. So we hope you watch, we hope you enjoy, and we hope you learn something. And happy Deaf Awareness Month.
Please describe your past experience with SLPs and audiologists, and what parts of their services did you find were helpful or challenging?
So I grew up going to a deaf and hard of hearing school for my first 3 years of education. And then when I got to first grade, I transferred to a mainstream school. And I had an SLP educational audiologist through all of that. I don't really remember starting speech therapy until I got to the mainstream setting. Um, and then growing up, I also at one point had a hard of hearing audiologist towards the end of my high school education, which I felt was really empowering for me. Like, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career. Because originally I thought I wanted to go to school for deaf education to become a teacher for the deaf. Because I had the same teacher for the deaf for 13 years probably. I started out with one and then he retired when I was in elementary school, and then I transferred to a new person. And I felt like the teacher of the deaf, not really part of this question, but was really helpful because she really took the time to explain my hearing loss to me with the audiologist. And I also had pressure equalization tubes as a child. And so we actually made like the toilet paper roll, we put saran wrap on it with a rubber band and then put a straw in it so that I knew what was inside of my ears. And so I think that was really helpful as a kid to like have those visual explanations of things that I had and things that I was wearing. Um, and my audiologist also really helped me be comfortable with my hearing aids, along with the teacher of deaf, because they work very closely together. Um, and my SLP, she was always super nice. I'm still in contact with her today. We still have like friends on Facebook. And so I think that some of the things that were most helpful were the fact that they explained it to me in ways that I was going to understand even from a young age, and also how they explained things to my parents and making sure that they understood and involving them in every single process, like IEPs, making sure that we're hearing their concerns.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about audiology. The biggest challenge is that at least most of the audiologists that I've worked with, including audiologists in training, they're not prepared to work with younger people. They are prepared to work with grandma and grandpa who are losing their hearing at a later age, and that's it. That's all they get. Let me tell you a story to illustrate my point. I went to an audiology clinic while I was a PhD student. I went to a clinic and I knew that I would see graduate student clinicians, and that was fine. I expected it. I walked in, checked in. I happened to see a friend of mine who is an SLP graduate student at the time. She's a signer. And so we were chatting while I was waiting for my appointment. I saw someone, the corner of my eye, I saw someone coming, and but they didn't really come right into my direct field of vision and like get my attention and wave. They just kind of stood in my peripheral. And I kept chatting because I wasn't sure if that person was for me, right? If they called my name, they really did nothing to make that attention grabbing visible. Finally, my friend was like, that person is trying to get your attention. So I looked over and they were just speaking my name, Leah. And I was like, okay, follow them. And they were talking to me the entire time that we were walking to our room. You know, I could hear the person talking. I didn't understand what they were saying though. So I was just like, okay. And I don't know if she introduced herself. Did she tell me, you know, hey, we're here to look at the mold that's been hurting you. Am I right about that? I mean, I don't know. I had no idea what she was saying to me. We go into the room and she keeps talking to me. The supervisor walks in a little bit later and she saw that she's just speaking away to me and kind of fiddling with my hearing aid that I had given her. The supervisor gets her attention and said, hey, what's in your hands? And the audiologist was like, oh, the hearing aid. And the supervisor was like, kind of waiting for her to kind of process the question a little bit further. And then that light came on, you know, hey, if I have her hearing aid, then she can't hear me, right? So that was, well, I think the best example of where training programs are failing students and as a result, failing the deaf community.
That was very detailed. Thank you. I can say you are absolutely correct. We are mostly working with aging populations, and we don't get a lot of experience with even younger than 30 years old. So I completely understand.
Yeah.
As far as audiology goes, I don't remember exactly, but as far as the university, a lot of the audiologists working in the universities, some of them, they actually know sign language. And that was the first time I had experienced that, because working, you know, in age 4 and up, until then, they probably had never seen that, and neither had I. So the first audiologist, I don't think had ever seen, you know, didn't know sign, didn't know anything about deaf culture from 4 up through 8th grade. And then as far as parents telling you not to speak with them because of speaking Arabic in my family, and there in Egypt, my parents stopped speaking Arabic, and they said that we needed to do speech therapy and that would help, and needed, you know, hearing aids, and that was it. But then as far as when I moved to America and followed along with that, you know, it was a little awkward at first and had to go through that adjustment. But then once I reached community college, at the college level, I saw people signing, and then they would ask me if I wanted to be involved with that. And then finally, at that point, when I had the hearing aids and was going to school later in college with the hearing aids, I probably wasn't until maybe 1998 that I finally decided to, you know, bury the hatchet, got rid of the hearing aids, and said goodbye with the butterflies and all. And then just maybe last year, or maybe 2023, I finally decided to purchase hearing aids again. And the reason was because I moved home with my parents, because my parents were getting older and my dad's got no teeth at this point. And so it was really impossible to read his lips. And my dad became more and more forgetful. He started, but I was really struggling as far as with my dad, because he was kind of speaking really kind of nonsense at times. And so it became a little bit difficult to communicate with him and really understand what he was saying. So I decided to go ahead and purchase the hearing aids. So then at that point, again, with the audiologist that signed, and I was just thrilled because I was able to easily communicate with them and have a conversation, was able to click the little buttons during the test. And the second audiologist that gave me hearing aids, they didn't sign. And it was even worse because they were wearing a mask the whole entire time, would not pull the mask down. So I was like, okay, that's fine. We used VRI through video relay interpreting through the little iPad screen. So they brought that in, which it was just difficult because I felt so disconnected with the person that was doing the evaluation while they were wearing a mask. And I just didn't really like that experience so much. The first one that I had previous to that, it was nice because there was no mask involved, and even still would pull down the mask if so, or, you know, would sign with me. But the second one, even though I could tell she was smiling, it was really hard, because as far as deaf and hard of hearing people, it makes things just feel so disconnected and really difficult to adjust when you have an interpreter present, and the vibe was kind of off. It was a very different vibe and quite challenging. So the first one was kind of a little bit better. The second was a little more challenging.
Okay, so the second question is, were there any specific practices or attitudes from these professionals that have positively or negatively impacted your experience?
So one thing that typically I'm typically struck by with audiology clinicians, and I'm not quite sure if it's both the local clinics and also the graduate student clinics on campus. Excuse me, interpreter, they are at the university where I work with. So this is true for both. Their intake form is very negatively framed. And they don't include the possibility that maybe a person doesn't want to hear for communication, and maybe that there's other reasons for that. You know, maybe there's, they want to have access to music or environmental noises, whatever. But typically questions are focused on how often is your hearing negatively impacting your communication? Well, not often, because most people in my life sign. And it's not really about my audiogram. It's about I surround myself with people who sign. So I really think we have to think a little bit deeper on the questions that are presented on the intake form, because they can make a huge difference. They can either make a potential patient or client feel welcomed and like, oh, wow, you know, they value me as a person and as a patient. They really see me as a human. Or that person can feel rejected and dismissed. And I've never really felt welcomed in a warm way into any sort of clinic. Yeah, and conversations like this one are a really big part of how to figure out, you know, okay, I am hearing, I don't know what's wrong with the system yet, but those who have experienced the system are telling me what they have experienced, and I'm listening and then passing the message along and trying to improve the overall experience. I wish I lived in the DC area, because I'm really wondering what the experience of audiologists and clinics are. I did go once as a graduate student in the DC area, and it was fine, you know. It wasn't like terribly positive or negative on either end. It just was sort of meh, you know, not really memorable. But I am wondering what it's like. At the time, I think their department was still more speaking and hearing based, but I think it's changed. There's deaf audiologists that are present. There's deaf student audiologists that are up and coming. So I'm really wondering to compare the audiology clinics I've been to that have, you know, trained graduate students, and then the one in Gallaudet, and see what the differences are. I know that people like you are out there, but they're not where I go, unfortunately.
I think the hard of hearing audiologist that I had was really empowering for me to have, because it was like nice to see someone with the same um difficulties that I've faced in my own life, and like having that person to talk to. Um and then also having the teacher of the deaf and like the audiologist, they really took the time to explain my laws to me, like my 504, IAP, ADA, and all of that, so that when I got to high school or when I was ready to start advocating for myself, I was at a point where I knew what the laws were. And even like going into college, because there's a lot of kids that go into college that don't know those laws that protect them. I worked as a student ambassador in my undergrad, and I can't even like recount the amount of students that came to me and was like, hey, how do I get started with disability services? And so I think that's something, I know we'll get into this later, But I think that's maybe something that audiologists and SLPs could work on, is more education about the laws, because a lot of parents and kids often don't know what there is out there that protects them.
What do you believe are the most important qualities or skills that audiologists or SLPs should have when working with deaf individuals?
I think it's important to understand culture, between like cultural differences from families that have hereditary hearing loss to compared to families that are new. Um, there needs to be some skill in being able to explain the different cultures that there are and different identities that their child may grow up with. I think that's something that not necessarily my upcoming lacked 100%, but I don't think there was enough conversation about cultural identity and just like how I want to identify myself. And then the second thing is respecting language. So making sure that we talk about all of the different language approaches, SIMCOM, oral, ASL only, total communication, all of that. Because I know from my personal experiences, some of what I've seen is they completely just first thing dive into that oral approach instead of talking about the options with the family and being like, here's these resources, and letting them make the decision. Um, and then remembering that it's not 100% fixed. No matter what we do, nothing is ever going to be 100%. Yes, their speech might get better or the hearing aids are going to help, but they're still not going to be 100% no matter how much we do to try and address that. And then the last thing is the ability to listen to their frustrations and their stories, and understanding the depression, anxiety, isolation, and all of those feelings that people may have regarding to hearing loss and um, language disorders. I feel fortunate. uh, I have gone through those feelings of depression, anxiety, and isolation myself, because I'm able to connect with my patients on a more personable level. And they're able to see, oh, I'm not the only one going through this. Um, yeah,
I'm sure that also helps you really connect with them and
yeah,
advocate for them as well.
yes.
I think the top most important thing is that your personal beliefs about what a person should do in regards to communication or hearing needs to be set aside. And then you just check in with them. What do you want as a person? If an SLP asks a middle school student, hey, what do you want to work on? Do you still feel that this is beneficial for you? Do you like doing speech lessons twice a week? Do you like being pulled from class? If that student says, yeah, I do like it. I like working on these specific things, then great, let's do that. But if the student says, honestly, my mom told me I have to come, but I don't enjoy it. I feel like it's a waste of time. I'm not learning anything. I'm not making progress. I'm missing out on what's happening in my classes. I'm falling behind. No, I don't enjoy this. I don't want to do it. Then, okay, let's talk about changing the IEP at that point. Or with adults, hey, what do you want to use a hearing aid for, right? Not like, hey, I'm going to help you hear and speak more clearly. Instead, asking them what they want. Maybe the individual likes music, they don't really want to speak, but they do want to listen to music. Then great, you can use your skill to fine tune the equipment and make music sound top notch for that individual. So I think that that's the most important thing. The personal beliefs have to be set aside, and you have to focus on the patient or the client or the student and what they want and need from your skills. The second thing, and I think that this is really important for both the SLP and the audiologist, but maybe more for the SLPs because they see people more frequently, audiologists maybe a little bit less. They need to figure out how to communicate with them. If you still need an interpreter in that communication event, that's fine. But at a minimum, know how to ask, hey, how was your day? Are you doing good? Is everything going well so far in today's lesson and appointment? So, oh, PE just finished. Do you need to drink some water? And then we can start, some basic signs. You don't need to be fluent. In a perfect world, yes, they would be fluent, but they don't need to be in this situation. But basic communication skills in a way that the students understand, the clients understand. That's really important. My husband is an SLP himself, and he was working with a middle school student on some Arctic stuff. And so he would explain in simultaneous communication, and she would say, yeah, go ahead and simcom. I like to watch and listen at the same time. So my husband said, okay, so he did that. He explained about the topic and he said, okay, now what we're going to do. And he explained, and then she would practice her speaking to him. But she was never without visual access to communication during their appointment at any point. So like walking down the hall, for example, to the room, you don't talk to a deaf person behind them when they're walking in front of you. Instead, you have to think about the individual that you're interacting with and how you can make communication accessible, even if you still need an interpreter. At the bare minimum, interaction skills, and giving some signs, showing them that ask them some questions, and then turn it over to the interpreter for the content of the appointment. Yeah, I think that's enough for now with my answer.
I love your answer. Thank you.
As far as like daily work, working with children, working with adults every day, the family of the children, even, it might be their first time and their first experience. And sometimes that can be really scary and really overwhelming. So keeping that in mind, especially if maybe it's the first deaf or hard of hearing individual in the family, or maybe they recently moved from another country here to America. Trying to be tenderhearted, take your time, moving slowly through things, trying to be conversational. And if you have the responsibility of letting the child know that they're hard of hearing or that they're deaf, that's something, you shouldn't be automatically deciding that that's sad news or that that's something that's negative. So just providing that information in a neutral way and just saying, we got the results and your child is deaf or your child is hard of hearing. And letting the family decide and letting them take care of it from then, as far as if they want to be happy or they want to be sad or shocked or however they may take it emotionally and decide how they feel themselves. I think another part of that that's really important is giving them all the options. And when I say option, meaning don't just pick one and say, this is what you should do, but giving them that full options as far as the range of, like, you can do hearing aids, there's cochlear implants, or there's the choice not to get cochlear implants or sign language, and not just limiting it to this is the option and that's it, and picking one. And then that approach, would include, the different, not necessarily including your specific characters and qualities, but just focusing on everything as a whole and seeing the whole person instead of just focusing on the ability to hear and maybe including, speech therapy.
What role do you think cultural competence and awareness of deaf culture play in the effectiveness of audiologists and speech language pathologists?
That's when I was struggling. I feel like it plays an important role because we have to understand the different cultural identities and even personal identities that people may come into our clinic with, and be ready to adapt and switch our mindset of, okay, this person doesn't want a totally oral approach. That's what I was going to recommend. That's what resources do I have that I can give them that's going to help them with what they want. Um, and also like really just trying to make sure that you understand the cultural basis behind these decisions, because if you can understand the cultural basis, I think that would benefit people like a lot, to be able to have that and understand why people are making the decisions they're making without letting your biases get in the way.
It's interesting that you mentioned cultural competence, because I just read, trying to remember where I read it, but somewhere something said we should not aim for cultural competence because it's impossible to incorporate every culture out there. And I kind of like really thought about that, because I've given workshops myself on cultural competence in the past and a variety of topics related to it. So that really made me think. I understand the points of that. Most SLPs and audiologists will never experience what it's like to be deaf, even if it happens later in life and they lose their hearing as an older person. They don't grow up deaf, so it's a different experience, not better or worse, anything like that, just different journeys. But our journeys definitely shape us as people and as professionals in our lives. So I think the first thing is that all SLPs and audiology students need more than just one semester of ASL. Many programs do require at least one semester, but some don't require any. A few programs out there like Gallaudet do require more, but the standard is just one semester is good enough. I disagree with that. It's not enough. And not just from a language perspective, but, meeting deaf people. Having more ASL classes mean that you'll meet more deaf people. And that means that students might think like, oh, right, okay, so my experience, I love music. I can't imagine what it's like to not enjoy music, right? But hey, this patient is telling me that they don't enjoy music. Okay, I don't understand their experience. I don't need to understand their experience, but I do need to use my training to support them in whatever way that they want. They came here to see me as a professional, so I need to find out why and interact with them and support them in the way they needed, even if I don't understand their reasoning, even if it differs from my own personal beliefs and likes. So I think with requiring 1, maybe 2 semesters of ASL, if that, it's not enough to really expose future SLP and audiologists to working with this population. I know that most SLPs will never meet a deaf patient or client. Most will not. But I still think that learning about working with that population will support working with other populations in their career. Just last night, I was actually talking with my husband about parallels between deaf and hard of hearing children and their families and the needs and the support needed for learning ASL with children that use AACs and their parents and families, and how they also need support learning how to use that. Because if they can't use it, what do kids do? It doesn't matter if the kid is skilled at using the AAC. If the family doesn't understand how, then it doesn't work. So there are parallels where the system supports those populations, right? So learning about one population can definitely help you in working with others. And SLPs are much more likely to engage autistic children than deaf children. So I believe taking more ASL is not going to hurt anybody. I mean, you learn more of the language, you may remember it, you may not, but the experience of meeting more deaf people, hearing their experiences will definitely support their clinical practice in their future, in whatever specialty they pursue. For audiologists, they need extra ASL, more ASL. They need more experience with not old people. Now, there's nothing wrong with, helping that population. It's fine. But deaf adults, deaf children, and deaf babies also need the skilled providers in the field. And right now, training programs out there, unless a person, happens to do their externship or internship experiences at a school for the deaf or in pediatric clinics or something, they're not going to get that exposure. So I think requiring more variety of clinical experiences for audiology, again, it doesn't matter if in the future you don't specialize in babies, that's fine. But learning how to work with babies will help you in the future in your career, because working with babies means working with parents. And parents are adults. Hey, and who are you more likely to work with in the future? Adults, right? So now you have more skills that you've internalized and different ways to engage with adults because of your increased depth of training. So the cultural competency, I think, is more than that. It's more than just the language skill. And meeting a variety of deaf people that were born totally deaf people who maybe lost their hearing as children, maybe late deafened individuals who lost their hearing as adults, grandma and grandpa included, just a wide variety of individuals need to be engaged with. Oral people that have been oral their whole life, people have signed their whole life, people who speak or sign depending on the situation. They need to meet a variety of experiences. So that way, when they meet a new patient or a client, they're not shocked at, oh my God, I've never met anyone like you before. Instead, they have a better idea based on their experience of like, oh, all the different potential clients that I could have out there is vast. And I will meet no two people that are the same, and they can be more ready for that. I think programs for both tracks, SLP and audiology, well, I think they're trying to get better. I recognize that, but I feel like there is still too much on certain populations to the exclusion of other groups that they may serve at some point. So I feel like that is what is missing from their academics and clinical practice.
For me, I think that's like the most important question, because again, backing up to my first answer, now being almost 50 and deciding to move back home with my parents, I mean, like I explained already, my dad started kind of reverting back to how things were with Arabic and not necessarily speaking English as much. And that was not necessarily my first language anymore. And so as of, age 4 moving on, I really didn't use it anymore. So they, again, had said, stop using it. So I really lost that piece, which really should have been my first language. And then moving back home, that was just a really big, tough, thing to deal with. And trying to learn to mediate between the Arabic and the English. And then, in school, I learned English. And then in college, I learned ASL. So I kind of teetered between just using English and ASL from college on into all of the different programs after that. But then when I came back home, it was like, it wasn't just English and ASL anymore. When I came home, I had this other language that I was already not used to, and I just wasn't able to understand. And they also didn't understand like my culture, but then I also wasn't really a part of the Arabic culture because that was taken from me. And that made me mad. I was quite angry about that because it really pissed me off, honestly. Somewhere out there, someone decided, that my family's language was not important enough to keep. And now at this age, I'm struggling with that because that was a misfortune. And I don't have access to my parents in the way that I would like because somebody made that decision for me. And that's really hit me hard. And I've tried to learn Arabic, but at age 50, it's not very easy. And then learning to lip read again at age 50 in a whole new language is really terrible. So thinking of culture, people really need to think twice about that because advising a family on how they should manage their culture, that might be taking away culture, or that might be, maybe suggesting adding sign language or adding English, but not to remove something that's already there. It doesn't have to, again, be just one thing and say, oh, you have to teach them English and they have to do speech therapy in English. And then in regards to, like saying cowboy or saying, all the different words that they have that they make you say with the hearing test. I remember at age 4, when I first was meeting with the teachers and stuff and trying to read lips, I mean, it was like, no way. I would always ask my mom, like, oh, what are these words? Because at the same time, it was interesting. They should have gone to my mom first, maybe, and recognized that English was not my language and said, okay, give me words that she knows. And, first, especially since it was my first experience, using something that was familiar to me would have been better than going the other direction where they fit it to whatever their test was and tried to format it to where I was tailoring to them versus the other way around. And of course I was going to fail. And they said, oh, she failed the test. But at the same time, I'll never forget, like, oh, she failed the hearing test. And I was a kid. I was 4. And then again, at 6, and then again at 8, and then again at 10. And then now at 50, I don't want somebody to say that I failed something because I'm not stupid and I'm just failed some stupid test. And, whether I can hear or not, I don't need to know that. I already know that. So I think just helping the family to understand, whether it's just they can hear or they can't hear. But that phrasing of like they failed their hearing test seems just so damaging. And I think that destroys people's confidence, that destroys their spirit, that takes away their self-worth. And so that word and that sentence is powerful, and words are powerful. And that affected my parents in a certain way too. And so starting with, what I know, and then allowing my family to be involved would have been a much more positive experience and would have been more comfortable for all of us, instead of just being in this awkward environment and already feeling overwhelmed. And then at the end, telling me that I failed at the very end. And, all the adults and me as a kid going, did I do good? Did I do a good job? Did I do right? And they're like, nope, sorry, you failed. I'm like, oh, but I did what you told me. And it was such a conflict and it just didn't sit right. So really thinking twice about incorporating people's culture and also being respectful of people's culture. And again, as a child, and trying to see them as a whole person instead of, just as one fact that they can't hear. So as a whole child or a whole adult.
Since you yourself are an audiology student, are there any like emerging like practices or new things in this field that you think should be integrated into standard care for deaf individuals?
So in our clinic specifically, I have actually given a resource. It's a communication card for deaf and hard of hearing individuals because sometimes through the police department, it can take a really long time to get those identification cards. And so it's a little card and it says like, I'm hard of hearing or I'm deaf. Here's how to communicate with me, and then some gestures for whoever's talking with them to be able to point out. And so I was like just trying to come up with ways that we could help our patients easier. And just giving them more resources where they don't have to be going out to the police station and try to sign up for this card when it's going to take 6 months to get it. And then the other thing was presentation of all communication options, which I had kind of talked about before, and also amplification options. I think that sometimes people may be quick to say, well, your child needs a cochlear implant. We're not even going to talk about hearing aids. And I'm very fortunate I do not have a cochlear implant, and that's something that I'm kind of thankful for. I mean, yes, there's probably sometimes that I wish my parents would have implanted me at a young age, but my parents wanted me to have that decision. And so I think that's really interesting when I go see patients with cochlear implants, and it's just like a trying to understand what led to that decision. And I did some research in my undergrad that talked about that and looked at parents who'd implanted their child from a young age. And it's just very cool to see the perspectives of my upbringing to those who did implant their child and why they decided to do it. And I don't think there's a wrong decision. I think it's what the parent wants to do. And so I think, but I just really do think it's important for audiologists to make sure that they're presenting both sides, not, and even also presenting no amplification. Some kids might not benefit from amplification and they can do just as well. And then talking about resources in public, so those communication cards, movie theaters, caption devices. I can't call how many people I've seen and I've told them about those movie theater caption devices, and they're like, I had no idea that was a thing. And even like my supervisors have no idea that's a thing because they're not the ones who have to go out and explore.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of is a benefit for me of having to kind of figure out what exactly I needed. And then also talking about vocal rehab and just any sort of public resources that there are. And then service animals. I have a hearing dog myself. And I've brought that up with some patients before who have those really high feelings of anxiety, or just that need for companionship. And so I've talked about it with some of my patients, not all of them, because I really try to save it for the patients I think would benefit from it the most and that seem like they need something like that, because some patients, they get their hearing aids and they're just fine.
Yeah.
And then the last thing was understanding the overlap between cultural identity and devices, and how a deaf identity may lead, even if they have that device, they might not use it.
Yeah, I know a few deaf individuals who use hearing aids but are like proud of their deaf identity, or that had cochlear implants growing up, and when they became adults, they decided, I don't want it. I'm gonna get rid of it. It's not part of my life anymore, and that's important.
Yep.
I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Your perspective is important. And I really appreciate your discussion about like everything that's available for our deaf and hard of hearing clients.